They say justice is blind. But that day in court, everyone saw color. The man on trial, wealthy, confident, untouchable, looked at the witness and laughed. She was nervous, soft-spoken, black. He didn't think her voice mattered. But by the time she finished speaking, his smirk was gone. His empire was collapsing. And everyone in that courtroom would remember her name. July 2021, Atlanta, Georgia. The city was buzzing again after lockdowns lifted. But inside one courthouse, a trial was about to expose more than anyone expected. The defendant, Richard Wallace, 44 years old, real estate mogul, business leader, family man. At least, that's how he wanted people to see him. Behind the curtain, his company was accused of defrauding dozens of clients, using fake investment projects to launder millions. He denied everything, said it was jealousy, said people were trying to destroy him because he was too successful. The prosecution had one final witness, a woman named Denise Holbrook. No one in the courtroom recognized her name, but when she walked in, everything changed. Denise was calm, poised, mid-30s, glasses on, hair pulled back, holding a single notebook. She was sworn in quietly and took her seat. The defense didn't even glance her way. To them, she looked harmless, another nobody dragged in to waste their time. When the prosecutor introduced her, the courtroom barely reacted. Ms. Holbrook, the prosecutor said, "You worked for Mr. Wallace's company for how long?" 3 years, she replied softly. "And your position?" "Data systems analyst. I manage the internal ledgers." At the defense table, Richard Wallace smirked. The kind of smirk people wear when they've already decided someone doesn't matter. The defense attorney stood up, polished, loud, and full of himself. "Ms. Holbrook," he began, "you say you managed ledgers. That sounds impressive, but let's be clear, you didn't have access to any executive accounts, correct?" "I had access to all transactions," she said. He grinned. "All of them?" "Yes." "So, you're saying you handled millions of dollars, and somehow, you never mentioned anything suspicious to your superiors?" Denise folded her hands. "I did. 14 times. The courtroom chuckled. Even the judge smirked. Richard leaned toward his lawyer, whispering something that made him laugh. The sound carried through the courtroom. Denise looked up, eyes steady. And then, everything changed. The prosecutor stepped closer. "Ms. Holbrook, did you bring evidence of the reports you filed?" She nodded. "I brought everything." She opened her notebook. Not the small spiral one she carried in, but a full binder, thick with color-coded tabs. "Exhibit 27, the prosecutor said. The clerk took it, handed it to the judge. Inside were internal memos, flagged emails, and transaction breakdowns, all signed electronically by Richard Wallace himself. Denise had been documenting every illegal transfer for nearly 3 years, and she'd done it without anyone noticing. The defense attorney tried to laugh it off. "Ms. Holbrook, these could be fabricated. You could have typed anything." Denise adjusted her glasses. "I could have, but I didn't." She reached into her briefcase again and pulled out a small flash drive. "I also brought the backups." When the screen lit up with evidence, you could hear a pin drop. Emails, bank transfers, signatures. Each one traced back to Wallace's accounts. Offshore deposits, hidden subsidiaries, shell corporations in his wife's name. Every detail she revealed hit harder than the last. The prosecutor didn't need to say much. Denise's calm voice did the damage for him. When one of the emails appeared with Wallace's own words, "Move it quietly before audit season," the color drained from his face. The defense attorney stood, shouting objection. "Overruled," the judge said without even looking up. Denise continued. "And here," she said, scrolling through another spreadsheet, "you'll see where he used disaster relief funds meant for minority-owned housing projects to buy a private property in Miami." She turned to the jury. 5 families lost their homes that month. He told them the checks were delayed. The jury stared at Wallace, a man who'd once been a symbol of success, now sitting like a ghost in a suit. As the courtroom fell into stunned silence, Denise glanced at him one last time. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The prosecutor asked, "Ms. Holbrook, why did you stay with the company after discovering this?" Her voice was steady. "Because every time I tried to quit, I got threats." "What kind of threats?" She opened the final folder. Printed text messages, all from an unknown number. But the messages used his phrasing, his slang, his style. She read one aloud. "You think anyone's going to believe a little black woman over me?" The courtroom froze. The judge leaned back. The defense attorney went pale. And for the first time in the entire trial, Richard Wallace looked afraid. The judge called for a recess. Reporters rushed for the doors, and Wallace stood, red-faced, slamming his hand against the table. "She's lying," he shouted. "She's trying to ruin me." Denise didn't flinch. She just gathered her papers and walked out. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Her calm expression never changed. When asked what she thought of his outburst, she said simply, "Truth doesn't need to shout." The trial continued for another week, but everyone knew the verdict before the gavel fell. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, a 27-year sentence. When the judge read it aloud, Richard didn't look at the jury. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at Denise, and for the first time, he didn't see color. He saw the person who dismantled his life piece by piece, with truth, patience, and precision. Months later, journalists tried to dig into Denise's past. Who was she, really? Why did she risk everything to testify? They found that she'd been working under threat for years. Anonymous letters, fake HR complaints. Once, someone even slashed her car tires outside the office. But she never stopped documenting, never stopped collecting. The truth, she said later, was that she knew what people like Wallace counted on, that no one would listen to a black woman in a room full of power. So she didn't shout. She recorded, and she waited. A year after the verdict, Denise agreed to one interview. It wasn't on television. She didn't want the attention. Just a podcast called The Evidence Room. The host asked, "Did it feel good to watch him fall?" Denise paused, then said quietly, "No, justice isn't supposed to feel good. It's supposed to feel right." Then she added something no one expected. "I think what broke him wasn't the evidence. It was realizing the person he thought he could silence was the one voice that ended him." 2 months later, a letter arrived at her office. No return address, just one line inside. "You think you won, but I'm not the only one." The ink was smudged, and the handwriting didn't match Wallace's. The police traced the postmark to a prison mailroom, but not the one Wallace was in. Whoever sent it was still free. Investigators reopened parts of the case. They discovered Wallace hadn't acted alone. His company had partners, lawyers, accountants, politicians, all part of a wider ring. And Denise's testimony, it had exposed them all. By the end of 2022, 5 more arrests followed, including Wallace's former attorney, the same man who'd laughed at her in court. Denise eventually moved to a different city. New nameplate, new office, same quiet determination. When asked why she didn't capitalize on her fame, the books, the interviews, the documentaries, she said, "I'm not the story. The truth is." But people remembered her anyway. The courtroom video went viral. That moment when the arrogant smirk disappeared, when silence fell over the room, and justice looked like her. Richard Wallace died in prison 2 years later. Heart failure. But his empire, what was left of it, was dismantled by his own board. In a strange twist, they donated part of his seized assets to fund scholarships for minority women in tech. The first scholarship bore one name, the Holbrook Grant. Denise never attended the ceremony. She didn't need to. Some victories don't need applause. They just need truth. They say power makes men bold, but arrogance makes them blind. He laughed because he thought her voice didn't matter, because he thought truth came with a skin color. He was wrong, and in that courtroom, in front of the world, he learned that sometimes justice doesn't shout. It simply speaks, and when it does, it can destroy you in silence. This is Hidden Case Files True Crime, where arrogance meets truth, and the quietest voices echo the loudest. Subscribe for more real and haunting stories, because some cases don't end in violence. Some end with justice.